Welcome into the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Matt Prehm, Erik Skopil, Jared Mack, all on the show today. It's a Thursday. We're previewing and getting you ready for Oregon's road trip up I-5, or what they're saying. Originally, it was always 99. I don't know why that ever changed, but Oregon goes to Corvallis to take on the Oregon State Beavers and the Pac-12, Pac-6, whatever we want to call it. There's two. They've got three different numbers all associated with their conference right now. But nonetheless, it's a rivalry game. Oregon State, last time the Ducks were in Reser, it was a game in which Oregon had a double-digit lead. They had, it was like a 3-score lead, and they squandered it, and Oregon State celebrated with a victory. And that's kind of been the, I guess, rallying cry or the motivation factor we want to talk, if we want to describe it that way, from Oregon this week. Is, they beat Oregon State last year, at home, but Dan Lanning said that he often thinks about that game. A lot of the players have talked and were asked about it, and they too said that they think about it, they're reminded of it, and it's kind of the rallying cry for this game, a game in which guys, like we were just talking about it, like Oregon theoretically should dominate this game, but as we've seen in the first 2 weeks of the season, they haven't done that to their previous two opponents where that's been the case.
Yeah, Matt, you talk about the 22 game being a rallying call. I think just as much as this team knows that they can play a lot better, it wants to put that out there. I thought that was really what stood out when I was just talking with guys this week, especially, Marcus Harper was, I thought, kind of a breath of fresh air for the offensive line in terms of just saying what needed to be said on Wednesday of, like, it's just not up to the standard. We can do better than this. It's very clear he hadn't lost belief that these guys can improve, but like they're aware of the fact that they're not playing well. It's impossible to mask that fact at this point. Anybody watching the games can tell these guys are really struggling. And I think for not just the offensive line, but the offense as a whole, and I'm sure there's some people on defense that feel that they haven't played up to their standard, giving up almost 200 yards on the ground last week to one player, certainly probably below what their expectations are. So, while there's the 2022 game lingering there, and Matt, and I think that's important to bring up because there are still players and coaches on this team that were part of that I'm sure that hasn't been lost on them. I think just taking a step forward and proving that you can play at a high level this season is just as important to this group, because it's been ugly through 2 weeks, and this is going to be the parting thought going into the bye week, and you'd hate to go into that bye week kind of leaving another crummy effort with kind of another bad taste in your mouth, I think.
Yeah, no, 100%. It's a game where also the 3 of the last 4 games played at Corvallis have all gone the way of Oregon State. So that's certainly something that Oregon is going to want to try to figure out and get right. They've done really well at home against Oregon State. I think the last time they lost in Eugene was 2007. So it's been a long time, but obviously playing in Reser is a tough environment. In 2022, it was still under construction. It was still very, very loud, and half the stadium wasn't even put into place, and there weren't even fans over where the press box, quote unquote, was. So it's going to be a tough environment. I have no expectations that it won't be just the same as it has been the last couple of years, despite the fact that it's been being played in September. I really don't think that matters. It might have lesser implications on teams instead of the final game of the regular season when you're fighting for a Rose Bowl or Pac-12 championship or whatever you're going to do. But Oregon and Oregon State fans still just hate each other. So this is still going to be a very big rivalry. I'm excited to go watch the game. I think that Oregon State's a solid team. I think that a couple of their the games that they've played against Idaho State and San Diego State have been really very similar to what Oregon State's done in the past. I think they're a run-heavy team. I think they like to set up their play action. They have some new wrinkles, like kind of go more 11 personnel than 12 and 13 than they have in years past. But I think it's still about stopping Jam Griffin, stopping Hankerson on the ground here if you're Oregon's defense, and then trying to establish the run on offense. It is, like I said, I think on yesterday's podcast with Erik, it is the same game plan as it's been the first 3 weeks. Get the run going, stop the opposing team's run, and try to hit them deep and get their offensive line or get Oregon's offensive line to perform better. But again, same thing. I feel like we're very repetitive on this podcast for the last couple of weeks, but again, Oregon is the much better team on paper. Paper doesn't matter. This is why you play the games.
Yeah, it feels like Last week was like a show me that you're better than you show week 1 type performance, but this one feels like if you come out and struggle again for a third straight game of putting away a team and not living up to preseason expectations, like almost kind of feels like we should just throw those out the window as like that's not going to be who Oregon is this season. Like maybe that's a little bit of an overreaction, but like the games are going to get harder, and this is your last real chance to come out and perform at a high level, and you're going to do it in an environment like Jared said. Like I'm excited to see what it's like because it's going to be nasty. Like Oregon State still, even today, when they rated another conference for 4 schools, like they are anti-Oregon in terms of blaming the Beavers for why, or the Ducks for why the Beavers are in this position. And there was basketball games last year in Corvallis, but football is king. And it's going to be juiced up, and it's going to be an exciting environment. I don't care when this game is played. I know it's a weird deal. Some people like it at the very end, but I don't know. I think it's going to add a new twist that it's a great weather game. It's not supposed to rain. It's not going to be like stupid hot. It's going to be I think this is going to be one of the better environments that we've seen in this matchup in probably the last 10 years or so. I don't know. I'm curious to see. And then how Oregon responds to that. Like we haven't seen them perform well at home. Now they get thrust into an arena that's going to be really hostile.
And that's the big takeaway for me, from this environment, which again, I'm expecting 10 out of 10 from this Oregon State crowd, assuming this game is competitive for a long period of time. And like basically whenever this game is, a 1 or 2 score game, I think there's going to be a ton of crowd noise. And what does that do for this Oregon offensive line? I mean, that's my biggest question mark and maybe concern going into this is an operation that doesn't look good at home with basically no crowd noise. Although Dylan Gabriel did acknowledge that there are some crowd noise things that got in the way of the snap issues at home. Like you can't be doing that on the road. And like, is this a game where there's just that the story coming out, the overriding story once again is the offensive line, and it's that, oh my gosh, it went even worse because they couldn't get the snaps lined up, or they were false starts left and right, or there are players lining up off the line of scrimmage over and over again. Just this the kind of silly stuff that you need to get set up that has not been able to be executed at a high level so far through 2 weeks. So that is absolutely at the forefront of my brain. I'm sure that's at the forefront of all Oregon fans going into this game. I'm sure it's at the forefront of Oregon State fans in the crowd of, if you've been following Oregon, their offensive line is a mess right now and is unable to kind of deal with some of the stuff. Let's get in their head. Let's play a role here because, it's not all that often that you can completely flip a game with crowd noise, but this feels like an offensive line that is susceptible to that. And I hope we're wrong, and I hope we come out of this game going, man, they handled that great, and there were some steps made in the right direction. But after 2 weeks, I think it's really hard to go in confident that they're gonna pull it together and play their best on a road environment, especially in one that I think is going to be, as you guys have both said, like I'm excited to see Reser in it's all in all its glory after the renovation, back to full capacity. The last 2 times we went and watched games at Reser, 2020, no one in the crowd. 2022, as Jared said, partial crowd. It hasn't been since 2018 that Oregon has gone up there when the crowd could be at max capacity for whatever the building was. And now we get an opportunity to see that, and I'm expecting that it won't disappoint.
What do we feel like is going to justify a good performance? Because I think we've kind of reset some of our expectations a little bit, but at the same time, like, how do we judge that? Is it simply just covering the spread, which, what, Jared, is it like 18 right now, 17?
16.
So, like, is it simply just covering by 16 points and getting out of there? Or is there more like than that we would have to say, like, yeah, Oregon's playing better football. We feel good about the performance that they gave.
I think it's a lot more than just covering the spread. It goes back to what we've been saying for very specifically last week against Boise State. You want to see Oregon's offense be able to take deep shots down the field or continue to do so after they did it against Boise State. You want to see them continue to be able to run the ball, which they did against Boise State. If you take out the sack adjusted yards from Dylan Gabriel's 3 or 4 sacks, I can't remember, they were running like 4.5 yards per carry. So That's still pretty darn good. It's much better than what they did against Idaho. So you want to continue to see that. You want to continue to see improvements on the offensive line, which we saw in the second half against Boise State. You're just looking for continuous improvement across the board on offense. So, and that, if that happens, if they do continuously improve at every position group, which is kind of what they've been doing from week 1 to week 2, but week 1 was so bad that it doesn't really seem like it's any improvement. Then they should cover the spread with ease. Again, this is an extremely talented team. There's a reason they were in the number 3 team in the preseason to begin with. A lot of expectations, a lot of hype, but again, they have the talent to theoretically back up that hype. So I think it's very clear that this needs to be an offensive display in terms of what we kind of want to see from this team and how, what I would gauge a successful team performance on Saturday. I feel very confident with the defense and what they are able to do. I still think they did a pretty darn good job last week against Ashton Genty, and that's a first-round running back. And there's not a first-round running back on on Oregon State. There is on Boise State, fun fact. And I still think that the interior of the defensive line is going to get their hands dirty. They're going to get a lot of pressures. Derek Harmon already has 13 this year. This is a big game for him and Jamari Caldwell and trying to stuff up the A and B gap. So I feel confident in the defense. It's just about when I come away from this Saturday's game and I'm like, was it good or not? It's it's going to come down to how Dylan Gabriel and the offense performed. I think that's just how it's going to be.
When I was doing the prop bets, which we're going to get to at the end, I almost included one of over under 6.5 clean drives. And by clean drives, I mean drives that weren't stalled out by penalties, stalled out by miscues, turnovers, whatever it could be. Because if you go back to the last couple of games, when they don't make mistakes on those drives, I think Dan's kind of talked about it. I think there's been one drive, maybe 2, because there's been some 3 and outs that, haven't had a sack, haven't had a mistake in terms of a penalty or a turnover that have ended without points. If they're basically every time that they're able to kind of put together and execute the way they want to, the drive ends the right way. And so I go into this game, that's going to be one of my focal points is just how many clean drives can you put together? Because I'm really confident this team, once they get it around the end zone, is going to be able to punch it in. There's too many weapons on the outside. There are plenty. Jordan James has been the best, short yardage back the program's had the last couple of years. He now is the primary runner. Frankly, I think he's looked pretty good. I know he's taken some criticism because he hasn't broken the long one, but he's averaging about 6 yards per carry and about 100 yards per game on the ground. This is a quality player. And so, I just think if you can string together consecutive and with some consistency, these kind of long scoring drives that you don't get in the way of yourself, I think then you feel better. Even if this game's relatively low scoring, but Oregon has 4 or 5 3 to 4 minute scoring drives that are kind of go the length of the field. They don't get in their own way. They're able to run the ball, mix in some of the, throws over the top. I think I'd come out feeling pretty good if you just feel hey, the offense executed and kind of looked like what the offense we thought was going to be going into this game. I don't need to see 2 or 3 explosive passes. It'd be great to see more of them, but I don't need to see a bunch of those. I don't need to see them run up the score and score 50 points in this game. But I think you'd love to come out feeling okay, they're able to actually do what we think this offense is supposed to do, because going into the season, this was talked about as one of the more explosive offenses in the country. And through 2 weeks, they've looked completely deficient to what we expected.
I think that's the perfect way to say it. Perfect, clean football. Don't make mistakes. That if Oregon State simply comes out and gets a stop on a drive and you have to punt, so be it. But don't make it harder on yourselves. Going back to week 1 of strenuous football is what Dylan Gabriel called it. That's very just direct to the point, and I like it. It's similar to what I was thinking of. You just want to see this team execute at a high level, whether that ends in a touchdown or not. The point spread to me isn't. It's like what I said against Boise State. The point spread isn't the end all be all for me. If you don't cover and Oregon State just has some crazy plays or some fluke things happen that lead to touchdowns, what happened with Janty, a crazy fumble by Patrick Herbert, and the very next play he broke 2 tackles, bounced it outside, 70 yards, touchdown. That's just an NFL dude making an NFL play. And did the defense maybe overcommit? Sure. Did they make mistakes? Yes. But that's just an NFL guy capitalizing on it. And that stuff happens in sports, and you don't you're not happy about it, but it's understandable. And so for me, like I look at it and just say, like, just like what you said, Eric, just play clean and don't make it hard on yourselves. And if you don't execute that, those are other things. Those can be fixed. Those can be adjusted from a scheme standpoint. But what's been so frustrating has just been shooting yourself in the foot continuously and doing it time and time again and finding new ways. Like I don't know what point in the game it was. Like Jared just looked over at one point against Boise State and was just like, "Are you serious? Are they doing this again?" I think it was like a kickoff out of bounds. But it was just like, how does this thing keep happening?
It was a kickoff out of bounds. It's the dumbest penalty in all of sports, and it happened a million times last year. And again, like you said, you're just shooting yourself in the foot, and it's like, of all things to mess up on, this is literally the easiest. It's 53 yards long or wide, excuse me. So go figure.
And the offsides, I think Eric asked that to Dan, and then there was kind of, we're kicking left to right, and it changes things. And it's like, no, that's just an excuse. Like those are easy things. Like eliminating those where it's lining up correctly, and it's Trayshawn Holden not talking crap to a player clearly after the play is over, and getting unsportsmanlike penalties and stuff like that. Like eliminate those. And if it's still a close game, it's still a close game, and you adjust and you adapt your expectations. But we haven't been able to, I feel like, truly justify how good this team is or isn't because they keep putting themselves in a difficult position. And so for me, it's just what you said, Eric, play clean. And if you do that, it wouldn't surprise me if this is a 56-10 game, in terms of an outcome. Because the reality is, like, Oregon is 6th in team talent, and Oregon State is like 76th in the country. And the Beavers have reloaded their roster, and they'll talk about how they went and got all these great guys from other schools, but they're FCS guys, or they're group of 5 guys, or they're guys from other Power 5 schools that weren't playing. And Oregon is the more talented team, and you just want to see it show up and show out on the field instead of on paper. All right, let's take a break, and we'll dive into some of our prop bets and our game predictions on the other end of the show. All right, welcome back to the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Good week for Eric and Jared. Bad week for me. Eric is still in first place, 12-8 overall. Jared is now 9-11. He had a big jump, real big jump for him. And then I am a couple back from Jared of 7-13 overall. So we'll go Eric, Jared, myself in terms of releasing ours. So team prop bets goes first. Over under 59.5 duck penalty yards.
I thought this would be a good one because it kind of ties right into what we were talking about a moment ago about playing clean football. And so I have picked the under. I am optimistic this week we'll see them play better. 59.5, by the way, is about what they've averaged through 2 weeks.
I'm over. They're averaging this. They did way more against Boise State at home. Unfortunately, I think it'll happen again.
I said under. I've just got confidence of things starting to click at some point, but it's going to be one where it's like they have 55. They're real close the whole way. Over under 1.5 turnovers lost. I'm assuming that's Oregon.
It is Oregon. Yeah, sorry. I thought that was pretty clear. I'm picking the under here. Really, Oregon's played fairly clean-ish football in terms of the turnovers, besides 2 really bad sequences in the fourth quarter last week. So are they going to be this kind of a team again and just can't control the ball, make mistakes? Maybe. I'm saying under, and I'm again being optimistic this week, as you'll see there'll be a trend here. I'm optimistic, Eric, this week, I think.
I am also under. I would not consider myself to be optimistic, Jared, until I see it. I don't have any faith in it. But I'm going under for the turnover battle. I think, just unfortunate circumstances for Oregon's fumbles last week. I think they do a really good job in general of keeping the ball under control. So I'm going to go under. I don't think that Oregon State has the dudes to make plays in the secondary to kind of because I think that's where the real turnovers would come from interceptions or something. So I'm going to go under.
Yeah, I said under. I don't think Dylan Gabriel will throw an interception. So then it becomes fumbles. And Dylan Gabriel's fumble against Boise wasn't really on him. Bad snap. Patrick Herbert was on him, but it was just unbelievable, great play, perfect tackle by Boise. And And then the previous week, it was a uncontested blocker or rusher sacking Dylan Gabriel. Like, clean those things up. They don't happen. So I said under. Over under 1.5 Oregon QBs played. This is probably along the lines of, do you think Dante Moore comes in?
I just was curious on if we thought this game got to that point. We all, I shouldn't say I went under because I do think while I'm optimistic, Eric, this week, I'm not optimistic enough to think they get to the point where Dante Moore gets to enter the game. But I put this in here just to see if anybody was.
No, under. Again, until Oregon shows it to me in person, I can see it happening that they can blow out a team. I'm not going to expect it.
Same. I said under. I think it turns into a blowout, but not enough to justify Dante Moore being put in. Over under Jordan James, 100 rushing yards. He had a career high 117 last week. Or not 117, 107, I think it was.
Yeah, I'm going over. I really like what we've seen from Jordan this year, kind of stepping into the lead back role. And while the Oregon offensive line hasn't looked very good, I know Oregon State's defensive line against the run has been kind of like one of the question marks about how they handle things. And I don't even know if it matters necessarily how it's not totally true, but Oregon's offensive line didn't perform very well last week, and Jordan still ran for over 100 yards. So I think that can certainly be the case this week, even if it's not like a huge improvement up front.
Yeah, I have the over. I think that Boise State's top-end talent was better than Oregon State's top-end talent on the defensive line, and Jordan James still got 100 yards then. I think that Oregon will figure out what their offensive line rotation is, and I think that's going to help Jordan James and the other running backs, so I'm going to go over.
I also said over. I think he's going to have a big day on the ground. I think this will be by far Oregon's best performance up front, which will in turn lead to him having a good game. Over under Dylan Gabriel 2.5 passing touchdowns. This is a good one.
Yeah, I went over. Again, I guess optimistic this week, but Dylan has, when he's had the opportunity, I thought played pretty well in terms of delivering the ball where it needs to go. And I think there's going to be enough opportunity this game. And frankly, I think they need it. I think they need him to have a strong game and the offense to have a strong game. So I'm going over on this.
Yeah, I went over as well. Dylan could have had 3 last week. He just missed Evan Stewart on a deep shot down the left sideline. So I think if he's given the chance to throw the ball, I think that Oregon's going to have success throwing it. I think Evan Stewart and Tez Johnson are 2 guys who are pretty much unguardable from a lot of defenses. So I think he'll have at least 3 touchdown passes.
Same. I said over. I like Dylan Gabriel's opportunity. He doesn't turn the ball over when he throws it, and he's been pretty darn accurate when he's had the time. So I think he'll hit the over here. Defensive side of the ball, Bryce Betcher, 7.5 tackles, coming off his best game maybe ever as a Duck.
Yeah, I went under here, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if he replicates another strong week, but I think that's a large number to hit. But we'll see. I mean, he's certainly playing at the level where he could do it again.
Yeah, I went under. It's just too high of a number for me, so I'm going under.
I said over, and then I kind of did this to get a chance to get a point if not. But I figure it's a similar game plan to Boise State, and I'm banking on the fact that Justin Jacobs, for whatever reason, appears to be the 4th linebacker for Oregon right now. And Bryce Betcher is the number 2, maybe the number 3. Him and Devin Jackson are rotating. But I'm going to bank on the fact that Betcher is going to play a bunch, and just by the playing time and the opponent, 7.5 tackles will be hit. So Oregon, 5.5 tackles for loss.
Yeah, I went over, but I really thought about hitting the under. In part, and I guess the case for under would be just maybe Oregon's able to really slow down this Oregon State attack, and Oregon State just doesn't run enough plays where you're having that many that are negative. So that would be the case for the under, but I did go over.
Yeah, I thought about that as well. Where maybe Oregon's defense is good enough to where they just aren't running that many plays, or they're incomplete passes rather than tackles for loss. But I still hit the over. I love a good defensive matchup. And I think Oregon's defensive line is pretty darn good.
I said over. I think we could see some sacks pop up because I anticipate Oregon State's going to face some 3rd and long situations, and Oregon's going to bring the house because I think they're going to have some confidence in their secondary being able to cover one-on-one and pretty quickly. So I'm actually taking over based on they're going to get a couple sacks plus the normal 1 or 2 tackles for loss on run plays. Jam Griffin, 124.5 yards rushing. That's right at his average.
Yeah, I'm going under here. I think Oregon's defensive line is going to have a pretty good statement here, and that's not to take anything away from Oregon State's running backs. I just think Oregon's defensive line is going to win at the point of attack, and I mean, frankly, I thought they did a really good job. It sounds like a broken record, and I sound crazy because the guy ran for so many yards, but like there was like 4 or 5 plays that Genty was able to just either out of his own effort or because of Oregon mistakes on defense, create huge gap plays. And if you are able to eliminate these against a lesser player, I think you can certainly keep him under 125 yards.
Yeah, 100%. I also have the under. Like Eric just went through, I thought Oregon did a good job against Genty. It's just that dude's a stud. Even in the plays that Oregon played well, had the right, they were gap sound, all of it didn't matter. He just made a jump cut and left. So, and I think that Boise State's offensive line is better than Oregon State's offensive line. So, and I think Oregon's defensive line will have more opportunities to bring them down the backfield. So I think I'm going to go the under. I think Oregon's defense does a good job.
Yeah, I said under for very much the same reasons. I think Jam Griffin's a good back, but he's not Ashton Janty. I agree with Jared that the Beaver offensive line is not the same as Boise State's. And I think Oregon's defensive line is starting to figure things out. Jordan Birch had a great game last week against Boise. I think that shows up again. I think Derek Harmon continues to be a terror, and Jamari Caldwell, really good week 1 against Idaho, didn't register any stats, had a couple in week 2. I think this will be his breakout performance too against Oregon State. We'll see the depth of Oregon's defensive line kind of show itself a little bit against Oregon State. So, all right.
Matt, I think we skipped one individual offensive prop bet.
Oh, did we?
Did we? I don't think we did.
Skipped the Tez Johnson one.
Oh, we did. So
and it was if Tez would have 5.5 receptions, I hit the under.
I went over.
I don't think he does the same thing last week of 3 catches, -1 yards.
I don't think that's going to happen either, to be clear. But we'll see. It could be a big Tez game. That might.
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of this offense at receiver is that it could really rotate like between the 3 or 4 guys that play. Of these 2 weeks it's Tez, next week it's Evan, and then Trayshawn had a good game as well against Boise State. The receivers are pretty stout here. All right, game predictions. I guess I'll go first. I think Oregon covers. I have Oregon winning by 17, 38-21. I think this will be a game that at some point Oregon and Oregon State will be close in the second half. But the depth of Oregon, the talent of Oregon will kind of wear down Oregon State a little bit. I think Oregon State's going to play clean football, really good, fired up. But as the game wears on, mistakes will happen. Oregon's got probably, if you take the 20 best players, Oregon probably has like 15, 16 of those guys on this list. And that's just really hard to overcome in a sport of football. If this was basketball or something else, like that's easier to do. But when the talent gap is so wide, eventually the cracks will be made and Oregon will take advantage of it. I like Oregon's defense playing really good against the run. And I think we see the best performance of Oregon so far, where we actually walk off the football field feeling like there's momentum here. They are playing well. This is a positive step in the right direction instead of the last 2 weeks where they've been stuck in neutral and you're kind of wondering like what's wrong? Why are they not doing this? And it's more negative than a positive, even though they won. So give me a Oregon 38, Oregon State 28 victory.
I like your point about if you were to like pick the 20 best players in the game, the high majority would be Oregon players. Because I think that's true. And I think that's been the hard part about the first 2 weeks too, is where
Right.
Like against Idaho, probably pick all 20 would be Oregon players, right? And like against Boise State, maybe the number's a little bit less, but it's probably not too much less. I mean, Oregon still maybe has the best. Again, I don't know. We'd have to do the exercise. 14 best players or something like that. So I do think that kind of depth should matter. And I do think ultimately, like when I looked at this game going into the season, I looked at the two rosters. I saw a massive talent gap. And so it's really hard for me to ignore that going into this game. And so I know I've got the largest margin here. But this is largely just like, if Oregon actually plays its best, this is what I think would happen. Oregon 45, Oregon State 14 is what I've predicted. But it's really hard to have any conviction on a pick like this when you felt the exact same way the two previous weeks. Is kind of the point Jared has made of like, this feels like a repeat of what we've been talking about the last couple of games of like, okay, Oregon's the more talented team. If they play clean, they should win by a bunch of points. And then the last 2 weeks, at least, you come out going, well, they didn't play clean and they barely won. And it was really ugly and people were pulling their hair out. And it came down to all sorts of heroics at the very end of a game that didn't feel like they should have required much of any. So I've got Oregon covering by 2 scores. I've got Oregon winning by a ton of points here because I see the path to like, if they actually played up to their potential, they should put this team away easy and they should roll away. And Dante Moore should get a series or 2 in the fourth quarter. And everybody should go into the bye week feeling like, okay, there's been some strides made. It's just really, really hard to have much confidence that that's what this team's going to do based upon what we've seen through a couple of weeks, and especially with the offensive line issues going into a hostile environment. So I'm going 45-14, but I'm very aware that this could go a myriad of different ways, including like they lose it or it's a really, really, really close game that comes down to another Atticus Sappington field goal or something.
Yep. I have Oregon winning 35-17. I have them covering the spread. I debated on making this like a 35-20 or 35-30 game. This is the same conversation we've had for 2 weeks now, and specifically last week, where it's like, oh, if Oregon performs to the way we all think they should win by insert X amount of points here. And yeah, it's just tough because I will buy it when I see it. And I still have them winning by 18. I do think that Oregon the last 2 weeks has won on talent and talent alone, where they're just much better than the other team. This is like Evan Stewart being faster than every cornerback on the other team. And it's like, all right, if I have enough time to throw to him, he's going to be wide open. Like that's talent trumping talent. That's not necessarily scheme. It's not necessarily like pure execution. It's like this guy's faster than that guy. And that was a touchdown or it was a 67-yard reception. So it's tough because Oregon's much more talented than Oregon State, at least on paper. This is their first road game. And like Eric brought up earlier in the show, Oregon's offensive line issues have all been communication problems. What's really hard for offensive line to do in a packed away stadium? Communicate. That's right. So I certainly hope that whatever they've been doing this week has alleviated some of those communication and execution problems, because it's going to be needed on Saturday. Oregon State is going to be chomping at the bit to make this a very close game, because that's what they always do. Every year, this game, not every year, but more often than not, this game is close despite the fact that one team is usually better on paper than the other. It's a close game all the time. So I don't expect it to be any different this week. I have Oregon covering and winning by 18. Am I really confident in that? Not really. Again, if they figure shit out, they should win by 20-30, because they are a vastly superior team against Oregon State, who is mostly comprised of like redshirt freshmen, sophomores, and a bunch of transfer portal additions heading into week 3 of their first season with a new head coach. They should be much better. Will they? We'll see.
Couple bonus ones real quick, rapid fire. Do we see a new starting lineup along the offensive line?
Yes.
Yeah, because I think Bedford's going to
rapid. Come on, let's go.
Well, you just gone. Okay, yes, because Bedford's going to play. So I'll say I think Bedford plays. So yes.
So yes.
I say yes, but Bedford doesn't start, and that goes into my next one. Does Bedford play? I say yes.
No.
I've already said yes.
Okay. Gary Bryant, does he play?
No.
I agree. No. That's the last one I think I had. There's any other like major questions of personnel do we have? I can't think of any.
Not really.
Those are just the two guys.
Yeah, and as we said
or maybe here's one: does Justin Jacobs take top 3 snaps in the lineup? Because that's a surprise.
No,
I say no.
I'll say yes, just based upon the matchups, but I could be very, very wrong.
I could see it being a yes because Oregon against Boise State in the third quarter played a 5-2-4 with Justin and Jeffrey, and I think that was really good and defending the run against Genty. So maybe that's what they do against Oregon State.
Cool. All right, that's going to do it for us here on this edition of the Autzen Audibles podcast. Enjoy the game. All 3 of us will be at Research Stadium. We won't be sitting in a box. Jared will have an actual chair and a seat, hopefully. Every time we go to Corvallis, it's interesting. It's interesting. Hopefully this time it's actually good. They have a new stadium. It should be. But until the next one, which will be a post-game edition, you've been listening to the Autzen Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.